There is a particular kind of silence that falls over a place when it knows something important is about to happen. Not the silence of emptiness, not the silence of a building after hours, when the machines go cold and the lights flick off one by one, and the only sound is the distant hum of Sheffield city traffic bleeding through the walls. This was a different silence altogether. This was the silence of 340 people holding themselves very still, very carefully, all at the same time. The way you hold a full cup of tea when you're walking across a room with a carpet you don't want to ruin. My name is Roy Callahan. I have worked on the floor of the Meridian Advanced Manufacturing Facility for 11 years, 4 months. And as of the morning this story begins, 16 days. I started as a materials handler, back when this building was still being converted from an old steel components warehouse on the eastern edge of Sheffield. I watched them bolt the first printer chassis to the floor. I was the one who fed the first batch of recycled aggregate into the hopper on a Tuesday morning in February, when it was so cold outside that the loading bay doors kept freezing at the hinges. And I have stood on this floor through every open day, every inspection, every investor walkthrough, and every school group visit since. But I had never seen the floor look like it did that morning. Every surface had been cleaned to a standard that I would describe as medically aggressive. The yellow safety lines on the concrete had been repainted so recently that I could still smell the paint when I arrived at 6:30. The printer heads, all 12 of them, mounted on their enormous gantry arms above the main production floor, had been wiped down, calibrated, and wiped down again. The recycled material feedstock hoppers, which on a normal working day are pleasantly dusty and smell faintly of processed aggregate and ambition, had been polished until they reflected the overhead lighting like enormous industrial mirrors. Someone had even put a plant near the visitor entrance, a real one in a pot with a little card that said nothing but looked expensive. This was the day Prince William was coming to Meridian. Now, before I tell you what happened, and I promise you, what happened was not what anyone planned, and it was better for it, let me tell you what this place actually does. Because if you don't understand what Meridian is, you won't understand why this visit mattered. And if you don't understand why this visit mattered, you won't understand why what Rosa did in Phase 5 of this story made 3 grown engineers cry in the car park afterwards. Meridian Advanced Manufacturing takes waste, not the polite kind of waste, not the neatly sorted recycling bin outside your house on a Thursday morning. We take construction demolition rubble, post-consumer plastics, end-of-life composite materials, industrial slag, and things that other facilities look at and say no thank you and send to landfill. We take all of that, and we run it through a processing line that shreds, separates, purifies, and reforms it into a printable compound that we call Meridian Base. And then we print houses with it. Not entire houses in one go, not yet, though Rosa will tell you that day is closer than most people think. What we print are structural wall panels, load-bearing corner components, insulated floor cassettes, and modular roof junction pieces. Precision engineered, certified to British standards, and built from materials that would otherwise be sitting in a hole in the ground for the next 400 years. Each panel takes between 40 minutes and 3 hours to print, depending on complexity. Each completed home built from Meridian components uses the equivalent of approximately 2 tons of reclaimed waste material, and each home costs, on average, 31% less to produce than a traditionally built equivalent, while performing better on thermal efficiency, acoustic performance, and structural longevity. We had produced components for 412 homes in the last 18 months alone. That was why William was coming. Not for a photo opportunity, not for a ribbon cutting. He had specifically requested, and his office had communicated this through 3 separate emails and 1 slightly anxious phone call, a working visit. He wanted to see the machines running. He wanted to talk to the people on the floor. He wanted to understand, not simply to observe. And that, as it turned out, was the one thing that Marcus Holt had not prepared for. Marcus Holt had been assigned to this visit by the regional office of a communications consultancy, whose name I will not repeat because I do not want them to get the credit. He arrived at Meridian at 7:15 in the morning carrying a leather portfolio, a retractable laser pointer, and the particular energy of a man who has laminated 17 copies of an itinerary and distributed them to people who did not ask for one. I received mine at 7:19. It had a header, it had subheaders, it had a column for narrative talking points and a column for approved visual backdrops and a column, I am not making this up, labeled spontaneous moment window, 3 minutes maximum. I looked at it for a long time. Then I folded it very precisely and put it in the back pocket of my work trousers, where it remained for the rest of the day, consulted exactly never. Rosa Acaffer, our lead engineer, was already on the floor when I arrived. She had been there since 5:30, which was not unusual for Rosa. What was unusual was that she was standing very still next to printer 7, holding a clipboard, not writing anything on it, just holding it. Rosa is 34 years old, has a first-class degree in structural engineering from the University of Nottingham, a master's in advanced materials science from Imperial, and has been the lead engineer at Meridian for 3 years. She is the most competent person I have ever worked with in my professional life. She was terrified. "Roy," she said when I walked over. "Rosa," I said. "What if he asks me something I can't answer in plain English?" "Then you answer it in the English you have and he'll keep up. He's not a child." She looked at her clipboard. "Marcus has written me 4 bullet points to use if there's a pause in conversation." "What are they?" She read them. They were the 4 most aggressively generic sentences I have ever heard in my professional life. One of them contained the phrase, synergistic sustainability outcomes. "Throw that away," I said. "Roy." "Rosa, you built this. You know this better than anyone alive. Talk like yourself." She looked at me for a moment. Then she put the clipboard face down on the bench beside her and did not pick it up again. Dev Sharma was the 3rd person I want to tell you about. Dev was 22, 7 months into his apprenticeship at Meridian, and had been selected by the facilities manager, entirely without Dev's prior knowledge, to stand at Station 3 and demonstrate the material sorting process to the royal visitor. Dev found out about this at 7:45 that morning. I know this because I heard him say the word "what" in a pitch that I had previously associated only with smoke detectors. He spent the next 45 minutes practicing what he would say, which was endearing, and then spent the next 15 minutes trying to make sure his safety vest was symmetrical, which was even more so. The convoy arrived at 9:58, 2 minutes early. Marcus, who had timed his welcome speech to begin at precisely 10 o'clock, made a sound like a man who has just been told the train left early. He scrambled toward the entrance. He got there just as the doors opened. He took a breath. He raised his portfolio slightly as if about to conduct an orchestra. He said, "Your Royal Highness, it is my profound hun." And William walked straight past him toward the production floor, looked up at the 12 gantry arms suspended above him, and said, quietly to no one in particular, "Good grief, they're enormous." Marcus lowered his portfolio. The floor erupted, not loudly, not in a way that would register as disruption, but in the private, invisible way that people who have been holding their breath for 3 hours all exhale at exactly the same moment. What you need to understand about a working visit, a real one, not the kind where someone walks slowly past things while nodding, is that it has its own rhythm. It does not follow a laminated itinerary. It follows the person's curiosity, and curiosity is not scheduled. William moved through the facility the way someone moves through a place they genuinely want to understand. Not quickly, not performatively. He stopped at things that interested him. He asked questions that were not on Marcus's approved list of anticipated questions. He listened to the answers all the way to the end, which, in my experience of showing people around this floor, is rarer than you would hope. At Station 1, the intake and sorting bay, where raw demolition waste arrives and begins its transformation, he crouched down to look at a conveyor mechanism that most visitors walk straight past. The mechanism uses a combination of air jets, magnetic separation, and optical sensors to sort material by type at a rate of approximately 4 tons per hour. "How does it know?" he asked the station operator, a man named Patrick who has worked that conveyor for 6 years and has never once been asked how it knows. Patrick blinked. Then he told him, in detail. William nodded throughout and asked a follow-up question about the false positive rate on the optical sensors. Patrick answered that too. It took 4.5 minutes. Marcus stood at the edge of the conversation looking at his watch with the energy of a man watching a parking meter run out. At Station 2, the processing and compound formation line, where sorted material is broken down, purified, and reformed into meridian-based printable compound, William picked up a sample block of the finished material. It is roughly the size and weight of a house brick, but it is the color of pale sand and has a slightly textured surface that catches the light in a specific way. "This used to be what?" he asked. Rosa, who had been quietly following the group since the entrance, stepped forward. "That specific block," she said, "is predominantly former roof tile, reclaimed floor tile from a demolished school in Rotherham, and post-consumer HDPE plastic, mostly bottle caps and agricultural piping." William turned the block over in his hands. He did not say anything for a moment. "A school," he said. "Yes." "And this becomes part of a new home." "Yes." He looked at the block for another second. "That's a rather good story," he said. "Rosa and I watched this happen. I was standing 6 feet away. Rosa did not reach for her clipboard. She did not use any of Marcus's 4 bullet points. She just said, 'We think so too.' Marcus wrote something in his portfolio. I suspect it was a note to himself to somehow take credit for that exchange later. At Station 3, Dev was waiting. I will give Dev Sharma this. When the moment came, he did not fall apart. His voice was approximately half an octave higher than its natural register for the first 45 seconds, which was noticeable. His hand, when he gestured toward the sorting mechanism, had a faint tremor that a seismologist might have found professionally interesting. But he knew his material. When William asked him how long he had been at Meridian, Dev said 7 months, and William asked what had drawn him to it. And Dev said, without rehearsal, without a bullet point, just straight out of his 22-year-old chest, I wanted to work somewhere that was building the answer, not just talking about the problem. The room went quiet. William looked at him for a moment. How old are you? 22, sir. William nodded slowly, the way people nod when they have heard something that they want to carry with them. Good answer, he said. Dev, to his eternal credit, did not faint. Now here is where I need to tell you about the bear skin cap equivalent of our world. Every place has them. The things that look unusual to outsiders but are absolutely sacred to the people who work there. At Meridian, there are 3 rules that every visitor is briefed on before they enter the production floor. Rule 1. Never touch a printer head. Not because it will hurt you, though it might, but because the calibration on each head takes 47 minutes to run and reset, and one accidental nudge can throw an entire print run. Rule 2. Never lean on a feedstock hopper. They are pressurized. The pressure is not dangerous, but the bang when the pressure seal audibly adjusts because someone has shifted the weight on the casing is extremely alarming and has, in the past, caused 2 separate visitors to drop things they were holding. Rule 3. Never, under any circumstances, walk across an active print bed. The material is hot, the surface is uneven, and the printer arm above it does not stop for anyone. These rules had been communicated to William's team in advance. They had been communicated to Marcus. Marcus had, in turn, put them in a subsection of the itinerary titled Safety Protocols, pre-approved. And for the first hour and 12 minutes of the visit, everyone observed them perfectly. The centerpiece of the day was always going to be the live demonstration at Printer 4. Printer 4 is our flagship machine. It is the largest on the floor, a dual gantry system capable of printing components up to 6 meters in length and 2 meters in height in a single continuous run. On a normal working day, Printer 4 produces structural wall panels for social housing projects across South Yorkshire. On this particular morning, it had been loaded, calibrated, and prepared to print a demonstration panel, a half-scale exterior wall section live, in real time, with William watching. The panel had been designed specifically for the visit, not because we needed it. We had thousands of panels, but because watching a wall section emerge from a printer, layer by layer, from material that was construction rubble 48 hours ago, is, and I say this as someone who has watched it happen hundreds of times, still one of the most extraordinary things you will ever see in a working building. Marcus had rehearsed this moment the most. He had a prepared narration. He had identified the optimal viewing angle. He had arranged for a photographer to be positioned at a specific spot that he had marked on the floor with a small piece of blue tape that he had applied himself at 7:30 that morning. Rosa took her position at the operator console beside Printer 4. The room gathered. William stood at the viewing line, the yellow-painted strip on the floor beyond which visitors were asked to stay, and watched the print head initialize. The first layer went down perfectly, a smooth extrusion of meridian-based compound, building the base course of the panel in a slow, precise pass from left to right. The material is deposited at a temperature of approximately 190 degrees Celsius and begins to cure within seconds of contact with the print bed. The smell is distinctive, warm, slightly mineral, not unpleasant, and the sound is a low, continuous hiss that fills the space around the machine like a living thing breathing. The second layer went down, and the third. Marcus moved to William's left shoulder, portfolio open, ready to begin his narration. "If I could just direct your attention to," he started. "SHHH," said William. Marcus stopped. He did not close his portfolio, but he stopped. The fourth layer went down, and the fifth. And then, on the sixth layer, at the eastern end of the print run, something happened that had not been in any rehearsal, any itinerary, or any of Marcus's 17 laminated copies of the day's plan. The printhead stuttered. Not catastrophically, not in a way that ruined the panel or damaged the machine. A stutter, a half-second interruption in the extrusion flow, caused by a small air pocket in the feedstock line. It happens, occasionally, on high-viscosity compound batches. Rosa had seen it dozens of times. It is resolved in under 40 seconds by a manual pressure adjustment at the console and leaves no visible mark on the finished component. But it happened in front of Prince William, and Marcus, and a photographer, and every person on the floor who had been holding themselves carefully still for 3 hours. The room did not exhale, the room held on. Marcus made a movement toward Rosa, as if he might somehow PR manage a printer. Rosa did not look at him. Her hands were already at the console, calm and deliberate, running the adjustment sequence she had run 100 times before. Her fingers moved across the controls with the specific efficiency of someone who knows exactly where everything is without having to look. 12 seconds. The printhead resumed, clean, smooth, precise. The sixth layer completed without a visible seam. Rosa looked up from the console. She caught my eye across the floor. She gave a very small shrug, the shrug of someone who has just parallel parked in a tight space and is trying not to look pleased with themselves. I almost laughed out loud. William had not moved. He had watched the whole thing, the stutter, the pause, Rosa's hands at the console, the resumption, with the same focused attention he had given to Patrick's conveyor belt and Dev's answer about building the answer. He had not flinched. He had not looked at Marcus. He had simply watched. And then he said, still looking at the printer, "She just fixed it, didn't she?" It was not a question. Marcus opened his mouth. No one heard what came out, because at that moment the printer completed the 7th layer and the room breathed again, all at once, in a collective exhale that felt like the building itself relaxing. Here is what everyone expected to be the difficult moment of the day: the printer's stutter, the unplanned interruption, the thing that Marcus had not accounted for and that had the capacity to make the facility look less than perfect in front of a royal visitor. That moment came, and it was fine. Rosa handled it in 12 seconds and it was fine. The moment that nobody expected, the one that no itinerary contained, no photographer was positioned for, and no blue tape on the floor had marked, came 20 minutes later in the quietest corner of the building. After the Printer 4 demonstration, Marcus attempted to steer the group toward what he had labeled on the itinerary as the formal presentation suite, which was a conference room on the mezzanine level that had been set up with a screen, 2 chairs, and a table with water, and this detail is important. A bowl of biscuits that Marcus had personally selected, and which, by his own account, had taken 40 minutes to decide upon. William had a different idea. "What's through there?" he asked, pointing past the main printer floor toward a set of double doors at the far end of the building. I looked at the doors. "That's the curing and finishing bay," I said, "where components come off the printers and go through their final quality checks before being certified for use." "Can we go?" Marcus checked his itinerary. The curing bay was not on it. It had not been cleaned to medical standards that morning. It had not been assessed for optimal photographic angles. It was, in fact, a working room full of engineers doing their jobs in the ordinary, unself-conscious way that people do their jobs when they do not know a royal visitor is about to walk through their door. "It's not on the," Marcus began. "Roy," William said. "Right this way," I said. I have known the curing bay for 11 years. It smells of warm cured compound and machine oil, and faintly of the coffee that someone always leaves on the workbench near Bay 6. It is not glamorous. The lighting is functional rather than flattering. The engineers who work there wear their regular PPE, not the freshly issued gear that everyone else on the main floor had been given that morning. The components lined up in the racks, wall panels, corner sections, roof junctions, are extraordinary objects when you know what they are made from, but to an untrained eye they look exactly like what they are: construction materials waiting. Rosa had followed the group through the doors without being asked. She stood slightly to the side, the way she always stands when she's in the curing bay, observing, processing, occasionally running her hand along a finished panel surface, the way someone runs a hand along the spine of a book they've read many times. William walked slowly along the first rack of finished wall panels. He stopped at one that was larger than the others, a corner section, L-shaped, approximately 2 meters tall. He looked at it for a moment without speaking. Then he said, "How many homes would a batch like this build?" Rosa answered without hesitation. This rack, 16 components, various types, would complete the structural shell of a 2-bedroom home. From intake of raw materials to this rack, the process takes approximately 72 hours. 72 hours, he repeated. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then, and I want to be precise about this because it matters, he turned to look at Rosa directly, not at the panel, not at the room, at Rosa. "How long have you been working on this?" he said. "Not here, I mean this idea, this process." Rosa looked at him. She was quiet for a moment too. And then she said something that was not in any briefing document, not in any bullet point list, not in anything that Marcus had prepared for her. She said, "Since I was about 9 years old, I grew up in Lagos. When I was small, there was a building near our house that had been abandoned, just a concrete shell, never finished. People used to sleep in it, and I used to walk past it every day and think, Why is there a finished building that no one lives in and people who have nowhere to live? That question never went away. It just grew up with me. The Curing Bay was very quiet. William did not say anything immediately. He looked at her for a long moment with the particular attention of someone who is not thinking about what to say next, but simply receiving what has just been said. Then he said, "And this is your answer?" Rosa nodded. "This is my answer." There were 9 other people in that bay at that moment. I was one of them. I can tell you that 3 of us, I will not say who, had to look away briefly at the rack of wall panels for reasons that had nothing to do with quality inspection. Marcus was standing near the door. I looked over at him. He had his portfolio open as he had throughout the entire visit, but he was not writing in it. He was not checking the itinerary. He was not looking at his watch. He was just listening. And here is the thing about the misdirection. The thing that makes this the part of the story I keep turning over in my mind. Months later, when I'm walking the floor on an early shift, and the building is quiet in that particular way it gets before the machines start. The moment everyone feared would be the problem was the printer stutter, the machine hesitation, the unscripted interruption in the middle of the flagship demonstration. That was the thing Marcus had no plan for, the thing that could have made us look unprepared, imperfect, less than what we had claimed to be. And it lasted 12 seconds, and Rosa fixed it, and it was fine. The moment that nobody feared, the quiet question in an uncleaned, unscheduled room at the back of the building, turned out to be the moment that this visit actually became something. Not a royal walkthrough, not a PR exercise, not a series of narrative talking points delivered to an approved visual backdrop. A conversation between a woman who had carried a question since she was 9 years old and a man who had come to find out if the answer was real. It was real. The wall panels in the racks around them were proof of it, and neither of them needed a laminated itinerary to know that. Phase 6, the human win and moral close. William spent 40 minutes in the Curing Bay. The formal presentation suite on the mezzanine level remained exactly as Marcus had arranged it. Chairs aligned, screen ready, biscuits untouched, water poured. It waited with the dignified patience of a room that has been carefully prepared for something that is not going to happen. During those 40 minutes, William spoke with 6 engineers who had not been briefed, rehearsed, or told to expect him. He asked about their backgrounds. He asked how they had ended up at Meridian. He asked one woman named Janet, who has been doing structural quality certification at Bay 4 for 8 years, and who describes herself as someone who hates speaking in public almost as much as she hates uneven wall surfaces, what she looks for when she signs off a component as certified. Janet told him, in considerable and accurate detail. William listened to all of it. At one point, a forklift truck operated by a man named George came through the bay carrying a loaded pallet of finished corner components, following its normal route, as if the morning were an entirely ordinary morning, because for George it largely was. He had not been informed of the precise location of the royal visitor, and had simply been told to continue his normal run. George and William met at a 90-degree junction between Bay 3 and Bay 4 at almost exactly the same moment. George stopped the forklift. William stepped to the side. George said, "Sorry, mate." Then, approximately half a second later, "Oh." William smiled. "Don't let me interrupt." George completed his run. Afterwards, he told his wife on the phone that he had called the Prince of Wales mate, and she said that was the most George thing that had ever happened to George, and he agreed that this was probably fair. When the visit moved back through the main floor toward the exit, something had changed in the building's atmosphere. Not loudly. It was not the kind of change you could point to. But the 340 people on that floor, the ones who had been holding themselves still since 6:30 in the morning, who had repainted the safety lines and polished the hoppers and been given freshly issued PPE and told to be ready, they were not performing readiness anymore. They were just there doing what they do, and someone important was walking among them and seeing it for what it was. At the exit, William stopped and turned back to look at the floor one more time. The 12 gantry arms above the printer bays were running, 3 of them active on morning production runs, their heads moving in slow, deliberate passes across print beds loaded with meridian-based compound. The sound of them, that low, continuous breathing hiss, filled the space from floor to roof. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he turned to Rosa, who was standing a few feet away. "What you're doing here," he said, "is not a proof of concept anymore, is it?" It was not a question exactly, but Rosa answered it anyway. "No," she said, "it hasn't been for a while. We just needed people to look properly." William nodded. "Well," he said, "consider it looked at." He shook Rosa's hand. He shook Dev's hand and said something quietly to him that Dev has not repeated to anyone, and I respect that, and I did not ask. He shook my hand and said that he would like to come back, which is the kind of thing people say, except that his office called the following Tuesday to ask about scheduling. And then he moved toward the exit. Marcus stepped forward. He had been quiet for the better part of an hour. His portfolio was closed, which was the first time I had seen it closed all morning. He had, at some point during the visit, stopped following the itinerary and simply followed the visit, which in the end are 2 very different things. He cleared his throat. He opened his mouth. He had, I assumed, finally found his moment to deliver the welcome speech he had been preparing for 3 weeks. The one that had begun, at 7:59 that morning, with "Your Royal Highness, it is my profound hun," and had not yet been completed. He looked at William, he looked at the floor, he looked at his portfolio. And then he closed it again. "Safe travels," he said. William smiled. "Thank you," he said, and left. I watched Marcus stand in the entrance for a moment after the convoy pulled away. He was looking at the closed portfolio in his hands with the expression of a man who has spent 3 weeks writing a speech and has only just realized, now that the moment is over, that the day was better without it. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Later that afternoon, after the cleaning crew had removed the plant from near the entrance, it turned out it belonged to someone in the admin team who had brought it from home and was quietly furious that nobody had asked. I walked the floor on my end-of-day check. The printers were still running. Printer 4 had completed the demonstration panel and moved straight back into its normal production schedule. Bay 4's certification queue had a full afternoon's work in it. George had completed 6 full pallet runs. Dev had eaten his lunch in approximately 4 minutes and spent the rest of his break standing near Station 3, looking like a man who has just realized his life has a before and after. Rosa was in the curing bay. She was doing what she always does at the end of a shift, walking the racks, running her hand along the finished panels, checking them not because they need to be checked again, but because she is the kind of person who wants to be sure, who has always wanted to be sure, since she was 9 years old walking past an unfinished building in Lagos and asking a question that took her 25 more years to begin answering. I stood at the bay doors and watched her for a moment. She ran her hand along one of the wall panels, a large exterior section, pale sand-colored, slightly textured, built from the rubble and the waste and the discarded things that the world had finished with. She checked its surface. She checked its edges. She nodded to herself, the small, private nod of someone whose work has passed the test that only they are qualified to set. Then she picked up her clipboard, the same clipboard she had been holding that morning without writing on it, and made a note. A real one this time. Job done. Components certified. Ready to become part of a home. I've worked on this floor for 11 years, 4 months, and 17 days. I have seen a lot of things come through that building. Rubble and waste and materials that the world threw away because it could not think of anything else to do with them. I have watched machines take those materials and make something new and strong and useful and good from them. I have always thought that was the most hopeful thing I had ever seen. That afternoon, watching Rosa make her note in the quiet of the curring bay, I thought, no, the most hopeful thing I have ever seen is the person who looked at the rubble and imagined the house, long before there was a machine to print it, long before there was a facility to run it, long before there was a royal visitor to come and look properly. The most hopeful thing is always the person who asked the question first. Real progress does not need a script. It does not need a laminated itinerary or a formal presentation suite or a bowl of biscuits that took 40 minutes to select. It does not need a photographer standing on a piece of blue tape. It does not need a 3-minute window for spontaneous moments. It just needs someone who has been carrying the answer for a very long time, and a room that is finally quiet enough to hear it. Rosa finished her notes. She capped her pen. She turned off the bay lights as she left, one bank at a time, until the finished panels stood in the near dark of the late afternoon, pale and solid and real, waiting to become walls. Outside, Sheffield carried on. The building settled into its evening quiet. And somewhere on the eastern edge of the city, 340 people went home and told someone what had happened that day, each of them with their own version, their own moment, their own detail that had lodged in them like something warm. George, I imagine, led with mate.